Hey guys, I just got back from the biannual Planned Parenthood book sale, and I thought I would show off some of what I got today. I really love going there because they have some really interesting out of print and vintage items. This is just an old book on biofeedback by Marvin Carlins and Lewis M. Andrews. So it might be kind of interesting to see what's in it. Um, I picked up this academic book on African folktales, mostly because it had some interesting animal lore in it that I could use in a future writing project. This is a really good book, only because I'm familiar with her book, Food and History, and because I'm a big old perv. It is Sex and History by Rie Tannehill. Then there is English Myth and Legends by Henry Bett. And an old vintage book from (1967), Psychic Phenomena, Revelations and Experiences by Dorothy Bradley and Robert Bradley, MD. I really dig those old vintage 60s dust jackets. Then I found two really interesting books on local American folklore. This one is by Walker Wyman, Wisconsin Folklore. And it actually has some really interesting passages on old folklore, such as folklore dealing even with booze and alcohol. This is A Treasury of Nebraska Pioneer Folklore. It was published, I believe, by the University of Nebraska Press. And it has some gems in it that absolutely came from Europe and Britain and the old settlers. As I was rummaging through the section on sociology, I found this really interesting magazine that I'd never heard of before, called Parabola: Myth, Traditions, and the Search for Meaning. And I decided to pick it up because it had an article in it called The Winding Knot: Weaving a Web of Fate Around the Hero, which is about the geisha taboo of Irish culture. And the author is Mara Freeman. I believe I have another one of her books around here somewhere. I also found this really interesting edition of Biblical Archaeology Review. I've bought some of their magazines before in the past, but this one had a really unusual cover story in it. Does he slay the Minotaur? Which is really unusual considering that it deals with biblical archaeology rather than the archaeology of ancient Greece. I was really excited to find an old hardback copy of one of my favorite books in the field of Celtic studies, Prentice McConaughey's Celtic Mythology. And if I could recommend only one beginner book on the subject of Celtic mythology, it would be Prentice McConaughey's Celtic Mythology, probably coupled with T.G.E. Powell's book The Celts. But if I could recommend only one book at all, hands down, it would be Dr. Dahi O'Huggins' The Sacred Isle: Belief and Religion in Pre-Christian Ireland. This is an absolutely invaluable text. It's everything I thought that Professor Hutton's The Pagan Religions of the Ancient British Isles would have been like. Only to have been rather disappointed by Hutton's unstated cynicism. I'll put it that way. It actually took me a few years to be able to track down a copy of this book, but if you can't find it, as a second best, I would recommend his later book, The Lore of Ireland, an encyclopedia of myth, legend, and romance. Earlier this week, I also received in the mail a few really awesome books. One that I think is invaluable to anyone in the craft that is of a more advanced level. It's Diana Paxton's new book that was just released last month, I think. The Essential Guide to Possession, Depossession, and Divine Relationships, which anyone that practices drawing down, this is essential reading. I myself do not practice drawing down because I am an idol worshiper in the old sense of the term. And I've only read, maybe just part of the first chapter and the introduction, and already I've seen that Diana is at least as skeptical as I am about the process of drawing down in ancient cultures, because it seems to be the exception rather than the rule. The rule seems to have been that most cultures were idol worshippers. They did not invoke the gods so much into themselves as they did into inanimate objects called idols, vessels, and things of that nature. I also got the Horns of Honor, which is a study of the horn god in early cultures. It's a republication of a book from the early 20th century with an introduction by Raven Gramasi. So I'm rather interested to read this. I've been a devotee of the horn god for a very, very long time. And also, on the recommendation of a friend, Marcus Fisher, I got a copy of The Candle and the Crossroads. So I'm really particularly excited to, thumb through this book and eventually give it a proper review when I finished. I've barely scratched the surface, but it seems somewhat like an autobiography in a sense, with magic thrown in. I'll have a better sense of it later on. But as a herbalist, I was really pleased to see that he actually included the botanical names for the herbs he was discussing. It's really a pet peeve of mine when an author doesn't give that sort of information, believing that their readers don't want to see that sort of thing, when it's precisely the sort of thing that they should be familiarizing themselves with. I've been a proponent of pagans eating their vegetables for a long time. Just because it might bore a reader, isn't an excuse to not include that sort of information. I'm a proponent of extremely well-educated witches, and I shake my head when I see authors not including the sort of information that I think they really should be sharing with the readers, whether or not they believe the readers will be interested. And I've had this book for a long time, but I can't recommend it enough. It's The Black Water. If you've never heard of it, totally go out, get a copy. It's got some solid material in it. Oh, and before I forget, I made a video earlier this week and about herbalism and books that I recommend. But as I was going through my books, there was a really important book that I completely forgot about, and that is Tyler's Herbs of Choice, the therapeutic use of phytomedicinals. So, if you want to take your knowledge of medicinal herbalism to the next level, go out and, get a copy of this book. Thanks, guys, and I'll keep in touch. Oh, I totally forgot to add that after I got done shopping at the book sale, I went to the Brass Armadillo, and I went in specifically to find some old antique iron keys for a friend of mine. I looked up and down that antique mall twice, searched high and low, and they were absolutely nowhere to be found. So I just want to apologize to Toby and to Marcus. I turned that store upside down. I couldn't find one. Well, I did find one, but it was about yay big, and they wanted about $20 for it. So, you know, it wasn't worth it when the keys I saw earlier were about a buck a piece, and they were big keys, about 5 inches long. So, I don't know what happened to them, and I really wish that I could have found them for you, or I totally would have brought them home and sent them your way. I'm really sorry that they were gone.